Morning, everybody. Morning, Terry. Terry, how would you describe this day? Thank you, Terry. You always have the right words. It is a beautiful day, and it's good to see you guys. Brendel, saw you coming in. Great to see you, man. Like the hair, the whole vibe. Glad you're here with us today. We've been on vacation, as you know, and we're back. Paul is not here. She had water in her ears, turned into an infection. In fact, I had to put her on the list there, Wendy. So pray for Paula that she might feel better. She just sent me a message. She's at home. I said, honey, we're not in South America. Take a day, right? Just be home and relax and rejoice. But it's funny because every time we feel from South America, we feel guilty. Like if anything happens and we're not at church, you have that guilt. And I said, hey, don't forget that we're in Santa Fe. We have all been vaccinated with the gospel, so it's going to be all right. You know, people are going to understand. But pray for Paula so she might feel better. Medication not working, so she'll go to the doctor again this week. And that's another headache. It's been impossible. I don't know about you guys, but it's been impossible to get doctors in town to make appointments. So have you guys experienced that too? So I'm planning to find the back door to the hospital and just walk in and say it's my turn or something like that. But keep her in prayer. But it's good to see you guys. We summing it all up, we went to Phoenix, Arizona, then Palm Desert, then we went to Tucson, Arizona, then we went to Silverton, and this week to Denver and Boulder. So we've been all over the place. And I had Emma earlier in my office. She says, you look very tired. And I said, and I just came back from vacation, which is exhausting. Yeah, I couldn't wait to come back and work because it's much better than just driving across the country out there. So anyway, it's good to be back. I'm sure Phil missed me a lot, and that's why he's here today. I'm very glad. But it's good to see you guys again. Are we here together? Yes or no? Yes? Did you miss me just a little bit? Okay, good, because I missed you guys. I'm always thinking about you guys. So it's great. It's good to see you. Glad to be back. All right? And now, by the way, I'm just going to be here every week till New Year. So it's going to be awesome. I want to finish Matthew. Obviously, I don't know if we're going to do it. I'm not in a hurry, like I told you, but I hope that we can get there so that I can introduce the newness of what is to come in 2022 in our weekly studies here together. But I'm excited about today, just because apart from continuing our journey through the Gospel of Matthew, we're going to talk about a text that's been quoted a lot in the last 2 years of, political craziness, and not only here in America, in Brazil as well. Give to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and give to God the things that belong to God. So that's the text that we're going to study today, Matthew chapter 22. So if you have your Bibles already, pull them. Let's open up to chapter 22 of Matthew so that we can continue our journey. Normally what I do is, as you know, I do the big review of where we are, and let's just do a little review today, okay? Little review is Jesus is still in the Temple, Jerusalem vicinity. You guys remember that? He came in with the donkey there. People were all excited. Then he got into the temple, and it's sort of the beginning of the end, right? It's the last hooray. He's about to die soon. And he gets into the temple, he flips the tables, and if all this is confusing, just remember that all of these messages are taped, and you can find them on YouTube. Review sort of where we are for the weeks to come. They're all there for you to watch throughout the week. So at the temple, after he flips the tables and sort of exposes what's happening with the religious, political situation of Jerusalem, the religious leaders, the aristocrats, the high priests, and they come to Jesus and they confront him. I mean, what's going on here? What's happening? And if you guys remember, if there's still any of our last weeks together in the top of your head, Jesus told 3 parables, 3 stories in reaction to what the leaders were presenting Jesus with. We covered those 3 stories. That's sort of the last messages that we had together. And today, a new group is going to approach Jesus, still in the temple vicinity. And in the weeks to come, what will happen in the text of Matthew is the different groups are going to ask 4 questions. We're going to ask Jesus 4 questions. What are the 4 questions? I wrote them here in the corner. First one is, the best way to summarize it is the dynamic between religion and state. All right? How does that work out? And that's why we're going to get into that. That's the first question. Then people are going to ask him about the resurrection. What's the greatest command in the law? And who is the Messiah? Tell us about the Messiah who is to come. So that's coming up. 4 questions. Today we're going to talk about the first. Relationship between religion and state. I'm also very thankful to Rob, Wendy for holding the fort, by the way, while I was away. Gene for speaking the last 2 weeks for us. Did we learn good things in the last 2 weeks? Yes or no? Good, so I'm very grateful, Gene. Thank you again for doing that. Apart from the beautiful music that you bring us as well. So, are you guys ready to go? Little review helpful. Where we are, Temple, Jerusalem. Jesus is about to die, Donna. It's going to happen. So these are the final words. The people are furious at Jesus for flipping the tables at the temple, for sort of subverting the common way of doing things, and everybody is sort of mad. He's losing disciples. Not a good situation to Jesus there toward the end. So for now, I just wanted you to know that people are going to ask him 4 questions, that he's still there in that temple situation, and I think that's enough for us to start reading the text today. So, they're going to ask him a question, Jesus is going to give them an answer, and our task here today is to try to understand that, and obviously what all that could mean for us today, because we live in 2021, not back in the day. So what could all this mean for us today? So you guys ready to read? Are we ready to go? Angelique, are we ready to go? And did you raise your hand because you're ready or because it's weird? Okay, you're ready. Okay, good. All right. Nothing weird yet. I didn't see your hand go up. That's good. So we're making good progress. All right. Let's read it. Read it. Repeat. Do you have the Bible there to read to? Ina, Dolores. You're Ina's reader. I want Ina to understand every line of the text today. Good. So let's go. Matthew 22, verse 15, all the way to 22. That's our reading for today. I'm going to read the whole thing, then we'll stop. Hey, Oscar. Good to see you, Marcella. Hey, baby. That kid is growing up, man. It's unbelievable. He's almost your size there, Oscar. The kid is growing up. Anyway, let's go. Verse 15. Then, so after flipping tables, telling stories to the high priests, aristocrats, then, after all that, the Pharisees, and we've seen them before, went and plotted how to entangle Jesus in his own words. Because remember, these are the guys who already want to kill Jesus. This is all the way back in chapter 12. They already want Jesus dead because he's doing stuff on the Sabbath. They want him out of the picture. So they still want to kill this man. So now they're going to try to kill him by entangling him in his words. Verse 16. And they sent their disciples. So they didn't go this time. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true and that you teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Beautiful words there. Verse 17, Tell us, Jesus, then, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Verse 18, But Jesus, aware of their malice, he was already cutting through the whole deal, saying, no, this is not. He said, Why are you trying to put me to the test, you hypocrites? And we had a chat earlier, Emma and I, about what a hypocrite means, right? Mask-wearing, double-faced, right? Why are you trying to put me to the test? He already cut through the whole thing. He knew what they were trying to do. But instead of walking away, this is what Jesus does. He gives them an answer. He says, Show me the coin for the tax. Because Jesus didn't have one coin in his pocket, which is going to be significant in a minute. Show me the coin for the tax. And they brought him a denarius, and Jesus said to them, Whose likeness, whose image and inscription is this? He holds to them the little coin. And Jesus, asked them that, and they said, Oh, it's Caesar's. Everybody knows it's Caesar's. Then Jesus said to them, Well, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And when they heard this, they marveled, and they left him and went away. And I can make a whole deal here, Oscar, about how being marveled by Jesus doesn't mean you're his disciple, which is interesting. They marveled and walked away. Interesting. But that's not what I want to talk about today. First thing I want us to understand is the characters of the story. Because normally we just go into the moral lesson, right? This is what, no, we need to understand what is happening in front of us. And the first step, Brendel, is understanding, number one, what the Pharisees, we've talked about this before, but I want to review what they were sort of about in comparison with this other group that they have joined with to catch Jesus in his words, which are the Herodians. Does that seem reasonable? We've got to understand what's happening, right? So that's what we're going to do now. So one of the first things we must notice in this text is that a new group approaches Jesus. Not the famous religious leaders of the time, the high aristocrat people, but the disciples of the Pharisees and the Herodians. And in any story, guys, characters are very important. It's not like this is an unimportant detail. It's very important for us to understand who these groups of people were. So that's what we're going to do. So first we need to understand, number one, Ina, that these two groups are not friends, not buddies. They don't hang out and grab a beer after work together. It doesn't happen. They hate each other. They are not friends. Why? Because they held opposing beliefs and they had opposing practices. They did not see eye to eye on almost anything, sis. I wonder if our society is sort of like that today. And yes, and the more we read the Gospels, the more we realize, by the way, how similar our society is today with what was happening back then. A lot of sickness, not a lot of access to health care, political, theological polarization, radical, hardcore political oppression, people, suffering under taxation and all these other things. Very similar in many ways. So this is why it's good to walk through the Gospels and see what was happening then in order to have a grasp of our reality, how we can live today as well. So let's understand just a little bit of these groups. One of them we've talked about extensively, but I just wrote 4 things that are sort of important when it applies to this story that I want you to keep in mind about both of them. Okay? Eric and Erica, are we together? So here you go. Pharisees, we know who these guys are. They're sort of they're like a party, really. They're very strict, law-abiding. It's a mixture of theology and politics. They had strong beliefs that, the Torah, the Pentateuch, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the prophets, they tried to live constantly by every detail of the law to the point that they added even more laws to protect them from breaking the ones that were written. So very strict, very legalistic, and even though people look down on them, oh, they're very legalistic, but we are all about grace and stuff. No, people who kept the law, Jewish people, they're not doing it because they're legalists. They do it because that's God's grace. God's grace had given them the law. So they believed that to be in a relationship with God, they need to do all those things, and that's what they did. But the Pharisees were sort of up a notch. They were really radically involved out of piety, out of religious fervor, to do the things that they believed were right according to God. So far, so good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in comparison with the other group, the Herodians. So while the Pharisees are sort of Jewish, individuals who are part of a specific group of people who held beliefs and specific practices, the Herodians were literally the aristocrats, connected to the temple. Now, obviously, the Pharisees had respect to the temple. They did the offerings at the temple, so they had that relation. But Herodians were more related to the political, high, spaces, VIP, situation. Why? Herodians, you already understand the name, they are connected to Herod. And there was not just one Herod, there were several Herods. But basically, they were supporters of the lineage of Herod, who converted to Judaism and who was one of the political leaders of Judea under the rulership of Rome, of Caesar. But why did the Herodians love Herod? Because he converted to Judaism. So, instead of expecting some Messiah that is to come in the future, let's just support the one that converted to our beliefs and just take him and his children to be, the deliverance. He'll figure a way for us to live in peace and live up to the promises of God. So, are you guys understanding the differences thus far? So basically one group, very religious, theologically law-abiding, the other, aristocrats, tied to the temple, to the priests, who are also connected, had these political connections. So that's sort of one of the main differences. Then, from that main comparison here, we can see that the Pharisees, they didn't like Rome very much. They hated the fact that their land was taken by Roman occupation. They hated the fact that they needed to pay tax, because the tax was a symbol that, that they were under the rulership of a foreign nation. It wasn't their people. That money that they worked and labored for was being taken away to support an empire that was not theirs. So the Pharisees had this contempt to Rome. They hated Rome. They were not buddies with Rome. Now, you know the tax collectors, why were they hated? Because they were responsible for taking these taxes that brought financial grief and weight to people. So part of the oppression, part of the weight of being an Israelite in Judea during the rule of Caesar, of Herod, is having to deal with the fact that you had to give your money away, your children away to pay for the taxes. You're constantly abused by the Roman soldiers. I mean, it was a horrible way to live. So Pharisees were those who supported drastically this contempt and disregard for Rome, and they hated the whole taxation system that came along with it. Now, for the Herodians, they worked with Rome. Herod was part of the whole deal. So they had to have a working relationship, and that made them in favor of the taxes. I mean, we're not going to shake the ship here. We don't want anything bad to happen because we want Herod to still have the rule. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? Are you getting a picture as to what was happening in Jesus' days, right? Are you okay with this, really? Because I could just turn on the whole switch of being a pastor and say, oh, friends, God has a word for you here today. And so can we just do this? Because I think it's more helpful. Then I'll get to the other stuff later, but for now, that's what we're going to do. So are you understanding? Is this clarifying the picture of what was happening? So finally, the Pharisees, they had hope for the coming of the Messiah, the anointed one, because all the Pentateuch, all the Bible, the Hebrew Bible anticipated the coming of the Messiah. No wonder in the beginning of the Gospel of John, beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, they go out into the desert to look at who was preaching out there. John the Baptist. And what was their question to him? Are you the Messiah who was to come? So they have this expectation that the anointed one will come. They're hoping for his coming, because with the coming of the anointed one comes the deliverance of Israel from all of empire and everything else. So they have that hope. The problem is that John has strong words toward them in Jesus as well, because they want Messiah to be just like them, to do exactly what they do, to think like they do. And John has no patience for it, and Jesus doesn't either. So it's a very sad situation. Jesus, John, they were all disrupting the sort of common order of things. So no wonder they wanted Jesus dead. All good? Now, Herodians, their hope was not for the Messiah. They just were hoping for Herod to keep his influence and his ability to rule through his children, through new little Herods that would come. So that's sort of the deal there. Is that clear now? Are we good? So why is all this important? Okay, thank you for the history lesson. So how does that help us now? I'm reading a book. I told Wendy about it the other day. Great book. Written by a Harvard guy called Michael Sandel. It's called The Tyranny of Merit. Highly recommend it. Phenomenal analysis of our sort of... Have you guys heard about it? Friend of mine, yeah? You should definitely read it. I mean, I had it in the audiobook driving across Colorado. It was great. And Paula was all mad at me because I pulled a piece of paper and started like writing in the middle of... Because I couldn't, I have to remember. And then she's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm taking notes. Yeah, but you have to drive. I said, yes, I don't know what to do. So anyway, that kind of book. And in that book, he had a very simple sentence. Like I'm driving, just lost in one of the chapters. He had a sentence that went like this. He said that we see the world, society, all of us, we see the world in light of our hopes and our fears. And that can be very simple, but I thought that was a profound insight. How true that is. Obviously, his whole argument is, if only our society, if only all of us could go beyond the social, theological, political debates and bullet points to realize that behind every single argument, every single face, there is a human being who has hopes and fears. And that's how we place ourselves in the world. So let's think about it. Normally this would get very polemical by talking about it from this thing over here, but I want to illustrate how simple this is. I read the paper every day, look at the news, social media. Two things have been sort of on the paper this last week. Immigration, right? Chaos in Texas there, people coming in. And number two, vaccination. Obviously, that has been in the paper for some time now. So let's just think about those two things for just a second. You've seen that if you turn on to one channel, they'll be talking about immigration one way, giving you all the things that you should understand. If you turn to the other channel, whole different thing, and we know that's our society that we live in, right? But what I want us to exercise today and every day is the ability to go beyond the bullet points that we hear on TV and that we see on social media and come together in the realm of fears and hopes. So that maybe, beginning here in our church community, we can go out into our society and propose an alternative way of being a society, which is realizing that there are human beings behind opinions, that there are human beings behind political partisan, ideologies, that there are human beings who have real fears and real hopes. So let's think, for instance, about immigration, just for a second. The question we should ask ourselves is not which political agenda I should follow, because that's normally how we go about doing things without thinking, but the deeper questions of what are our hopes and fears. So, thinking about immigration, some out there might fear the threat to our safety. So there are people coming into the country, and I'm afraid. Is that a legitimate feeling? Yes or no? Yes, it's okay to feel that feeling. So are you already understanding that before you start going to the bullet points of whatever, it's okay. Some people are afraid that this can be a public health safety situation. They're afraid of that. So they might feel threatened. And therefore, that is attached to a hope. They hope for closed borders. So are you guys understanding the connection of things? So before we get to, right, left, just realize that there are real people with real feelings about things and hopes and fears. So they fear for their safety and they hope that there's some way that there's better borderline control so that they can feel safe. At the same time, they also have a sense that they want the nation, American culture, to be preserved from external globalistic influences. Right? Globalization has sort of been a thing for some time now. We have Starbucks and McDonald's right all over the place. And although that made many Americans and people in the West feel very safe and secure, what has resulted from that is a source of we lost a little bit of what it means just to be us. Without foreign... Are you guys with me? Yes or no? That has been all over. Is this a legitimate feeling? Yes or no? I think it is. It's okay to feel like that. It's fine. So what I'm trying to do here with you guys today is, again, to create a mechanism in our mind and in our heart where we can go beyond the partisan politics to see the human beings and their hopes and fears. Because guess what? That's what Jesus did. That's what He's about to do with the Pharisees and the Herodians, who, by the way, had their own ideas about politics and about how theology should be, about who the Messiah should be. And then Jesus, instead of denying and pushing them away, He tries to remind them of what truly matters, of how to deal with our hopes and our fears and how to set them in a healthier platform. That is what Jesus did. So at the same time I talked about immigration, there are other people who fear that the country is losing its promise, its original promise, to be a beacon of light. It's written in the Statue of Liberty, an open country to anybody who wants to have a shot, to have a chance at becoming somebody. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? And they fear that that's going to be lost. Is that a legitimate fear? Sure, that is a legitimate fear as well. So it's interesting how we have conflicting, a whole polarized view of politics, and yet at the same time we are all human beings with hopes and fears. for several different things. So some fear that the country is losing its promise to the world, opportunity to all, and they hope for no borders, for more open borders for people to have that promise here. Sort of what, John Lennon back in the day wrote in the song Imagine. Imagine there are no countries, no religion, everything else. So that kind of ideal. So some people have different fears and different hopes. That's what I'm trying to say. Are we together in that sense? Yes or no? Yeah? So what we must try to do constantly is see the humanity behind people's opinions and to realize that for sure, 100% behind all of those strong opinions that we read online of whatever orientation, we're all human beings with hopes and with fears. And what happens is that we have allowed ourselves to align our imagination, our heart, our hopes and our fears to political, social, or even religious groups that give voice to them. That is why our society is so polarized, because we found groups of people sort of voicing our fears and concerns in whatever way, and we just rush to that group, and then we're going to talk about that in a second as well. Vaccination. Let's talk about that. Let's get more polemic. Also huge. Some fear that their bodies are being violated by untrustworthy scientific elites. Is that a legitimate fear? I think it is. I can send you articles, by the way, about the noble lies that have been told to our society in the last couple of years. It's true. So you can't just come to somebody, you're just a scientific denier. No, it's okay. There's a lot happening in this country that we're unaware of. And some people feel that they're out of the loop and that they cannot trust people. So it's interesting how that is a legitimate fear, and we should acknowledge it and we should honor it. These people who are afraid for their bodies because of untrustworthy people, they hope for transparency and honesty. And that's also a legitimate concern, hope and fear. Others fear other things. They fear the effects of the pandemic or COVID for the country or the economy, and they want everybody to be vaccinated because of these concerns, or their fear for their life. They want to preserve. So, again, behind every strong political opinion out there are people with what? Hopes and fears. Always. They hope for a world where we can trust our leaders and science and common sense, but we know that that's not always easy because they're not always truthful. And yet, to be human is to live in trust of one another and of others. And that's why community is so important after all, where we can listen to one another and have differences of opinion, but meet together in that realm of hope and fear and align them, more importantly, with the way of Jesus, which is our goal here today. So after talking briefly about immigration, and obviously there are many other fears attached to this, I'm just doing a short version of the deal. Vaccination and immigration. Today it's hard to talk about hopes and fears in public, isn't it? Are you guys with me? Yes or no? Whenever we're online or whenever we're in a public situation, it's very hard to come with somebody who's throwing, well-known arguments at you and say, wait, what are your hopes? And what? No, nobody does that. You just try to counter-argue with whatever is true to you. So it's hard to talk about hopes and fears in social media culture. We live without being violent and using an abundance of confusing words and ideas. And this is partly because, like I said, we side, even unknowingly, with religious and partisan political groups that organize and give voice to our hopes and fears. The problem is that in doing so, as with the Pharisees and with the Herodians, we inevitably allow the groups to place us in the world according to a package of assumptions and premises. And when we look to the other side, to those who don't think like us, we do not find their fellow citizens carrying their own batch of hopes and fears, but we find enemies, don't we? Yes or no? That is how society functions today. Like I said, we all have hopes and fears, every single one of us. But what happens is, because of TV, because of social media, we don't know what to do with our anxiety, our feelings, our hopes, and our fears, and we just side with the group that is voicing our hopes and fears without realizing that by siding there, a whole package, a whole way to live comes with that. And it is evidence at the moment when we look to the other side, people who have different hopes and fears, and we don't see people who have hopes and fears, we see enemies. That is the moment we know we have accepted the batch without realizing that we have lost something about what it means to be human. Are you guys with me, yes or no, thus far? Yes. So this is the deal. The most important thing we do as a community of faith is reminding each other every week, Tuesday night on Bible study, Thursday night at prayer meeting, today here, to remind ourselves of the way of Jesus. Because we are constantly being placed in the world in different ways. And whatever ideology we assume will determine how that will go about. So for instance, I told you about the Pharisees. The Pharisees had absolute no relation with Herodians. They considered each other enemies. Because of what? Because of the package. They didn't come to one another to talk about hopes and fears. They already knew what the theological, political presuppositions were, and they just agreed to disagree, go on with our day. And then they lived in a world with Romans and with Caesar and with Jesus, and everybody is sort of in their corner trying to eliminate the other so that finally they can live in peace by whatever is true to the group. Interestingly, what America has done, what society has done, and Brazil is no different, in the West altogether, is we have transformed Christianity into another group and isolate ourselves from everybody who disagrees. That's the crazy thing. What was Jesus doing? It's very easy. He was just eliminating all the borders. And that's what he's going to talk about when he says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and to God what belongs to God. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? Yeah. So are you understanding this? To be a follower of Jesus is to go beyond the political, theological, partisan deal and see the human behind all of it who has hopes and fears, who has real feelings. And it's okay to have all of them. And to invite them to participate in a movement that accepts others for who they are, without having to make them drink whatever Kool-Aid you've accepted yourself. So yes, because Pharisees and Herodians had hopes and fears, their parties held strong theological and political convictions that also gave voice to their perceptions and placed them in the world in a specific way. A Pharisee would not sit down with a Herodian. They would not sit down with a Samaritan. They would raise walls and walls and walls and walls and walls. And guess what? All of the disciples of Jesus were part of one or group or another. And that's the crazy thing. Jesus invited all of them to sit down at the table and say, oh, there's a better way. And what's the better way? Well, you're going to realize that your political project, it has an expiration date. It's not going to work out. There's a kingdom, though, kingdom of heaven, who is here now. And it's interesting, and can do something in the world. And they tried it. They trusted it. And here we are, 2,000 years later, confused about our identity, forgetting these basic things about what it means to be followers of Jesus. So yes, Pharisees and Herodians, much like today. And the irony here, obviously, you saw it in the reading, is that these two conflicting groups joined together around a common enemy who was disrupting their particular visions of the world, Jesus. This is why Jesus recognizes their malice. But the question here, my friends, is, and can I go a little longer just so that we can actually go into give to Caesar what it means to... So what's the big deal with their question? Why do they... So they're joining together. People who never joined together are joining together to go after Jesus. And they come with a question, Dolores. Say, is it lawful to pay taxes So why is this question very important? Do they agree in regards to taxes? Yes or no? Pharisees and Herodians, do they agree? No. One is against, the other is in favor of. They disagree. But both of the groups come to Jesus with the question. So what are they trying to do? It's very simple. Not hard. You're in trouble in one way or another. So you already understood, right? If Jesus says, yes, do pay the taxes, what happens? Tell me. He not only alienates taxes, but the Pharisees now can look at Jesus and say he is a betrayer of the Jewish cause. He is no Messiah. He is nobody, and that would be the end of it for Jesus. Are you guys with me? Done. Game over. So the Pharisees are not dumb people. They're very smart. They wanted to entangle Jesus in his words. That's what they do. Is it lawful to pay the taxes? If he says yes, he's done. Not our Messiah. Business as usual. We'll go home. It's going to be all right. But if he says no, don't pay the taxes. The Jewish people are going to go, yeah, we don't care about Rome. Let's go into the revolution. But then the Herodians would make a phone call. They had it in speed dial. Hey, we have a disruptor of the peace here. And you know how those guys, you know where they end up, right? You wear it all the time. We have it in our cars. We have it everywhere. It's cross. You go to the cross as a public disruptor of the peace. So can you understand the malice in all of this? So that's it. What are they trying to do? They are trying to push Jesus into one of the alternatives. Say, are you one of us? Because if you are, then you're going to hate the other. So what does Jesus do? And this is the whole deal with Jesus. Jesus is not siding with anybody. To believe that Jesus belongs to a party, to a group, is to deny the very essence of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So what does Jesus do? He responds with, first of all, he doesn't give the answer. He just asks for a coin, which is interesting. He asks for a coin, and the image is interesting. It's like, hey, pastor, should we pay taxes? And then I turn to you and say, well, show me $1. It's like, well, you don't have $1 in your pocket? I do now. I normally don't, but I think I do. Yeah, I have $1. So I could have shown. But the image of Jesus not having even a coin in his pocket is already striking. Why? Because as they are all worried about taxes, and that's sort of like an external determinant of where you are in the whole political, it's like today, have you been vaccinated? Yes. Oh, then I already know your whole story. Have you not? Oh, then I know. Are you guys with me? Yes or no? It's like we just reduce people constantly. We dehumanize. It's like it doesn't matter who you are as long as you have done this one thing that matters to me. That's what taxes was for them. They were huge on the money. They loved the money of whatever was going on. So Jesus doesn't have a coin. So that's already Jesus saying that whatever is important here, I truly don't care. He doesn't even have a coin in his pocket. So I'm not going to go into the prosperity gospel sermon now, but you can already have a picture of who Jesus sort of was. This homeless wanderer that we meet at Pete's place once in a while, or every week now. It's good. Anyway, Jesus doesn't have a coin. His life is not dictated by concerns over currencies, markets, taxes, politics, prosperity, all that stuff that is important to us. The words that come out of the mouth of Jesus are important, though. First thing that Jesus asks is, whose likeness? Whose image? Why is this important? Why do you think that's the first thing that Jesus asks? He doesn't go, hey, give to Caesar. No, he starts with, give me a coin and tell me who this is. Whose likeness? And it's interesting that he uses the word likeness, because when you translate the Hebrew Bible, which is written in Hebrew, into the Greek, you have the Septuagint. Okay? That's what the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And the word likeness that is used right here appears very early in the Bible in the book of Genesis. When God creates Adam and Eve in His image and in His likeness, meaning that likeness in the Hebrew imagination is not just what image is. It's a charged assessment. It's not only whose likeness this is, but likeness is attached to many other things. When God creates humans in His image and likeness, it's not like, oh, we look like God. No, it's about non-physical things as well. It's about behavior, the capacity to love and to forgive and to think, to choose, to feel, to have aesthetic sensibilities. All of these things, to have talents, all of these things that we have come from the fact that we are created in the image of God, in His likeness. So when Jesus raises the coin and says, whose likeness is this? He's not just asking the obvious of what they know. He's saying, what does this all mean to you? What kind of life is attached to this? So this is why I wrote here, likeness is always connected to a form of life, to a way to live. He raises the coin and says, who do you see here? And what are the values attached to this kind of life? Because you're all debating no taxes and taxes. I mean, is this the way that you want to live? Is this your life? Well, I'll tell you what. Give to Caesar what belongs to him. But don't give to Caesar what belongs to God. And the obvious question is here, what belongs to God, my friends? Everything. Jesus is inviting us to live outside of these little divisions and concerns, to embrace a life, an entire life that seeks first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, which is another little big word for justice. And it's justice. In other words, don't worry about being against or for taxes. Don't let that determine who you are, but live seeking first the kingdom and the justice of that kingdom, which is live in generosity and in kindness and all the fruit that we talked about in the last 2 weeks. Live by that. And then suddenly you will see that you will not have enemies. You will not be putting people down. You will not be categorizing people. You will be living according to what God has planned for all of us every day. It's an amazing thing to choose, to seek. Are you guys following me? To seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, its justice. What does that mean? It means that I will not settle with right or left, with liberal, conservative, with traditional or progressive. No matter if we're talking about politics or religion, it doesn't matter. We align with what is true in the kingdom in order to see it everywhere. Its power, its goodness. To embrace that form of life that will never, Brendel, dehumanize other people. Reduce them to a single decision of what they did in their arm in the last month. To live like that is how we subvert culture. That is the liberation that God was bringing to Israel. To go beyond the oppression of Rome, not by eliminating Rome, but by knowing how to live in Rome, within oppression, by transcending it in our heart, in our mind, and with our faith and with our trust in Him. To live by a whole different set of values. Whose likeness? How do you want to live? With the image of God and His kingdom, of by Caesar's rule. It's a powerful idea. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but do not give to Caesar what belongs to God. The ultimate question is not whether one is for or against the emperor, but whether one is for or against the project of Jesus and His kingdom. That's the question that we must ask ourselves as a community of faith in His Messiah. The emperor has put his inscription on the coins. He can have them back. We do not live by personal, partisan, political, theological visions that lead to an alternative vision of the world. We live by what is true to the kingdom of heaven, generosity, kindness, and we place ourselves in the world through the way of Jesus. So what is Jesus doing here, my friends? He is not creating a distinction between religion and state, but inviting Herodians, Pharisees, Brazilians, Americans, all of them and us, to step away from all of our alternative commitments that are at odds with the kingdom of heaven, with the certainty that everything that we are and have belongs to God. That's it. Everything belongs to God. Jesus invites us to place ourselves in the world with a new set of hopes. A conversion of hope. That is what Jesus is offering us. The transformation of fear we began talking about fears and hopes, right? How all of us allow groups to voice them. Jesus is inviting us to renew our hope in something alternative to all of that. To eliminate fear by something alternative to the alternatives out there today. So yeah, Jesus invites us to place ourselves in the world under a love that casts away fear. He invites us to seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, to be sensitive to life and to other people's fears and hopes, to be there for them, with them, in their hopes and in their fears, to not place them in the categories served to us by our culture that tell us that others are our enemies, to see in the face of the enemy the image of God. That is the kingdom of heaven. That is the narrow way of Jesus. To refuse to dehumanize, to refuse to reduce in order to see the human being there, as Jesus did. Back in the day, and I'll finish with this last quote, I read a wonderful book by C.S. Lewis called The Weight of Glory, which is an awesome title because the word for glory in the Hebrew is kavod. And kavod means weight and glory. So he wrote a book called The Weight of Glory, which is awesome. C.S. Lewis wrote this. I read it when I was young, and it has impacted my life since, and I want to share this with you as we close. I quote, "A man may have to die for his country, but no man, woman, must, in any exclusive sense, live for his country. He who surrenders himself without reservation to the temporal claims of a nation or a party or a class is rendering to Caesar that which of all things most emphatically belongs to God Himself." Isn't that powerful? The moment we side with an alternative vision and reduce the other as our enemy is the moment we step away from the kingdom of heaven and the plan of God for our church community. To refuse to do that is to step against the current of our society, our culture, in Christian religion today, and to choose the narrow way of Jesus that refuses to dehumanize the other, because the other carries the image of God and belongs to God just as we do. Amen. Are we together? Yes or no? I truly hope, I have many hopes and fears as well. But I hope that if there is any change in our society today, Clint, that maybe it can begin in our church communities, where we learn how to see beyond things, humans with fears and hopes, and to invite them to participate in what Jesus invited us to participate in, kingdom of heaven. Let's pray together. Dear God, we thank you, and we praise you because our community has heard the call to seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, to see humanity, to see life, to see beauty, to place ourselves in the world through the way of Jesus. So may our hope, may our fear be converted. May our imaginations be touched by your healing power so that we might live in the way of Jesus, seeking first your kingdom. Bless us as we move in that direction, we pray. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, my friends, we have food for you now because we're not crazy.